And welcome back to Let's Think with Shepard the Voluntaryist. That's me. We were chatting in the last segment about what voluntarism is, and in this segment we're going to talk about many of the things that surround voluntarism, or most voluntarists believe, but that aren't necessarily part of the basic tenets of the philosophy. They're not requirements. It's just, seems like most people that do that are that do the voluntarism thing believe roughly this. And by the way, there's a lot of arguing and there's a lot of anger and hatred between conservatives and liberals, and we're all told by the politicians that we should hate each other because we're very different in what it is we believe. And I would argue that we're not. I would argue that most human beings, if you sit down with them over a cup of coffee and just chat, most of us pretty much believe the same stuff. If you say, hey, if you see somebody broken down in front of your house, would you let them use your phone? Well, yeah, of course we would. Well, if it was going to be an hour and a half until anybody got there and you almost had your dinner ready and you had plenty of it, would you share it with them? Well, of course we would. And I'm talking about all over the world. This is not just a America thing. It's a everybody in the world thing. A Hawaiian in Iran would probably find that if they went up and were friendly, hey, my car broke down. Can I borrow some, or can I have some water to put in the radiator and see if I can get it going? Well, of course, they'd be happy to help you with that. People are generally good and helpful, and people generally don't want to get into other people's business, just kind of a live and let live thing. And we hear this term a lot about being socially liberal and fiscally conservative. And that's what, evidently 80-90% of the population is that. And then the various political sides try to pull people more to one side or the other and polarize them. But I think most people are kind of like that. I really don't care if my neighbor has a bunch of AR-15s or a bunch of gay lovers or whatever. I don't care as long as it's not interfering with my life. You get to make your choice, do what you want at your house, and yeah, you can absolutely still borrow my weed eater, even if I don't like the idea that you have AR-15s because I'm not a gun person. I don't. You're my neighbor. Of course, you can borrow my weed trimmer, and I think most people are kind of like that. So I just kind of wanted to get that out of the way and say that I don't think we're all that different, and I suspect that as you listen to what I think most voluntarists believe, that you're going to find you just might be a voluntarist without even knowing it, or pretty close to it. And if there are differences, then please join the conversation. Please let me know, and it'd be interesting to know in what ways we're different, in what areas maybe I didn't explain very well. So some of the things that most voluntarists believe, I think the first big one that maybe I should have even included it in the first segment of the must-believe portions, is that participation in the political process is not a good thing. We shouldn't do that. That's not cool. We shouldn't legitimize a system in which some people rule over other people and steal from them, because those things are not voluntary. And if I don't have a right to do something, can I give someone else the right to do that? And I ask myself that, and I think, well, no. If I don't have the right to walk up to somebody and take $10 from them, then can I hire someone else to walk up to that person and take $10 from them? Well, no. I can't transfer a right that I don't even have myself. So I think that would be something that would probably be part of the fundamentals, part of the foundation of voluntarism is that we don't transfer this authority that we don't even have to a small group of people who are then going to tell you that you need to have a permit to build a back porch or take your money away from you when you're trying to sell the fruits of your labor or your land. You're trying, somebody's getting some minerals out of your land, and then somebody at third party wants to come in and steal a portion of that. That's silly. That's what most voluntarists would believe. And so voting for someone that is then going to come in and do those bad things, that wouldn't be consistent with voluntarism. Another thing that is believed by most voluntarists is that intellectual consistency is important. And this is really important to me. And we talked about this last week when we discussed the means versus the ends and how we have to just be honest. And if we discover that a value we have or a principle we have, if we discover that it's not really true, like, for example, let's talk about stealing. If you say that your principle is all stealing is always wrong, and that's something that you believe in, then as long as you keep that phrase, that principle, all stealing is always wrong, then you have to be consistent with that. Intellectually, you have to always live by that. And then if you discover, well, wait a minute, we need to have roads so that I can get from one place to another, and there's no way that the free market could figure out how to build a long, flat thing. And so therefore we need the government to build roads. And in order for the government to build roads, the government has to steal just a little bit of money from everybody so that there can be a nice road. Well, if you believe that, then, and I'm not arguing here whether that is correct or not. I think you might get the drift of what I think. But if that's what you believe, okay. But you would need to go back and change your principle from being all stealing is always wrong to saying stealing is okay, but only for certain reasons. And that would be your new principle. That would make you intellectually consistent. And that consistency is actually something that I kind of require with my conversation partners. And I don't call people debaters, or I don't like to debate because I don't know all the truths. I'm looking for the truth. So I like to call people conversation partners. Whether we agree or not, we each toss out ideas and, hey, is that person's idea better than mine or not? But if I'm going to have that conversation, any conversation with someone about important things, philosophy, morality, that kind of thing, I do only have those conversations with people who are intellectually consistent. If they're not, it really isn't worth the time speaking with that person. Another thing that is pretty popular among voluntarists is the concept of the means versus the ends. And we talked about this at length last week, so I won't blabber on and on. I encourage you to go to our SoundCloud podcast, Let's Think, and check that out and see what we talked about in the last week's show about means versus ends. But the long and the short of it is that the means, what we decide to do each day, to many voluntarists is more important than the end. So we're not going to say that the ends justify the means. We think that's a horrible idea. We think that we just each day do the right thing, and if we do the right thing, then there's a good chance the ends will turn out well, but that really isn't what we're going for. We're going for doing what's right every single day. And we each get to choose what we believe is right. And there are going to be differences. We're not all going to think that the same things are okay, but as long as we do that, we should all get along okay. Another huge aspect of voluntarism is an insistence on honesty, that we're honest with each other, that we don't defraud each other. And that kind of gets into the stealing thing, which voluntarists absolutely, I think all voluntarists would agree that stealing is wrong, and then honesty kind of being part of that idea of doing something that is not honest or straightforward. So most voluntarists are honest with what they say. They're not gonna lie to you. Of course, that's what we shoot for. We're all human beings, and nobody's perfect, obviously. But that's a big part of voluntarism. I've noticed that most voluntarists are pretty benevolent. And benevolent, the idea of being well-meaning and kind and that kind of thing. Most voluntarists are pretty easygoing in that way. They don't want to hurt others. They love vigorous debates. But other than that flaming out on each other over social media and arguing about big ideas, other than that, I find that most people are pretty good-hearted, kind, nice people. Another aspect or another thing is the idea of social contracts. And I believe almost all voluntarists would agree that there's no such thing as a social contract. They can't actually exist. It's impossible, because a contract by definition has to have certain elements in it, or it doesn't exist. And for those of you that are attorneys or otherwise involved in law, you can back me up on this, I imagine, that a contract has to have certain things in it, or it is no longer a contract. And this is something that has caused a lot of heartache over the years, over the millennia, are people assuming that there's a contract when in fact one doesn't exist. And I think that we might even save this and chat about this more in the next segment, because this really deserves, this idea of social contracts, I think it really deserves some looking into. And Rousseau had his famous social contract, but you right now, you're driving along, or you're paused in traffic, and you're thinking, well, what is a social contract, and what are the elements of that contract? What parts of it are important? And if you came up with a social contract, things that you thought all people ought to do, or the way that all people ought to behave with each other, and what people's responsibilities are, etc., yours would not be identical to mine. I hope we would all be slightly different. So I don't think of it as a contract. I think of a preference. We all have preferences for how we wish society would behave and get along with each other, but we can't assume that there is a contract simply because we believe in a certain set of preferences. So since we don't believe in preferences, which is obviously a word I'm having difficulty saying, let's talk about contracts, social contracts, when we return after the break. Stick around, please.